Hey, listen up, some secrets feel way too heavy to carry all by yourself. And this is Sarah's story. All about how one little moment of not being strong changed everything she thought she knew about love, staying true, and who she really is. Sarah Mitchell stood at her kitchen window, watching the morning sun make golden lines across her neat lawn. At 32, she had everything she'd once dreamed of: a pretty colonial home in the suburbs, a successful husband, and a marriage that looked perfect from the outside. But as she sipped her coffee in the quiet of another regular morning, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important was missing. "You're up early," came David's voice from behind her. Her husband of 8 years walked into the kitchen, already dressed in his neat business suit, his phone already buzzing with messages. "Couldn't sleep," Sarah replied, making herself smile as he kissed her cheek, a usual move that had lost its warmth years ago. David barely looked up from his phone as he grabbed his travel mug. "The Henderson project is keeping me late again tonight. Don't wait up." And just like that, he was gone, leaving Sarah alone with the echo of the closing door and the familiar ache in her chest. When had their talks become so empty? When had they stopped really seeing each other? Sarah had always been the kind of woman who caught people's eyes. Her auburn hair caught the light in ways that made folks turn their heads, and her green eyes held a warmth that drew others in. But lately, she felt invisible in her own home, like a pretty painting that had been on the wall so long nobody noticed it anymore. The day stretched ahead of her, like every other volunteer work at the community center: grocery shopping, making dinner for a husband who might not even come home to eat it. But Sarah had no idea that this particular Tuesday would be the day everything changed. The community center was buzzing with its usual afternoon energy as Sarah organized donation boxes in the storage room. She'd been volunteering there for 3 years, finding purpose in helping others even when her own life felt without purpose. It was honest work that fed her soul in ways her comfortable but empty routine couldn't. "Excuse me, are you Sarah Mitchell?" She turned to find a man standing in the doorway, and for a moment, her breath caught. He was tall, with dark hair that curled a bit at the edges, wearing a simple grey sweater that somehow looked fancy. But it was his eyes that stopped her deep blue and focused totally on her, like she was the only person in the world. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" He stepped into the room, and Sarah noticed the way he moved with quiet confidence. "I'm Marcus Reed. I just moved to town, and I heard you might be the person to talk to about volunteer opportunities. I'm a photographer, and I'd love to help document some of the center's work." As Marcus spoke about his passion for capturing human stories through his lens, Sarah found herself really into the conversation for the first time in months. He listened when she talked about the families they helped, asked thoughtful questions, and somehow made her feel like her opinions mattered. "Would you like to grab coffee sometime this week?" he asked as their talk wound down. "To discuss the volunteer work, of course. I'd love to hear more about what you do here." Sarah hesitated for just a moment. It was innocent enough, just coffee to talk about charity work. "I'd like that," she heard herself say, and was surprised by how much she meant it. As Marcus left, pressing his business card into her hand, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years: anticipation. For the first time in so long, she had something to look forward to. But as she drove home that evening, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning she wasn't ready to hear. The little cafe downtown was nothing special: mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, and the comforting smell of fresh bread. But when Sarah walked in Thursday afternoon and saw Marcus already waiting at a corner table, the ordinary space suddenly felt full of possibility. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, standing to pull out her chair. The gesture was old-fashioned and sweet, so different from David's distracted politeness. "I almost didn't," Sarah admitted, then wondered why she'd been so honest. Marcus smiled, and she noticed the way it reached his eyes. I'm glad you did. I've been thinking about our conversation all week. They talked for 2 hours about photography and charity work at first, but the conversation naturally drifted to deeper things. Marcus told her about his recent divorce, how he'd moved to their town for a fresh start after his marriage of 10 years had quietly fallen apart. We grew into different people, he explained, stirring his coffee absently. One day, we woke up and realized we were strangers sharing the same house. It was mutual, but it still hurt. Sarah felt her chest tighten with recognition. That sounds familiar. Trouble in paradise? Marcus asked gently, and something in his tone made her want to tell him everything. It's not that dramatic, she said, then paused. Actually, maybe that's the problem. Everything is so predictable, so safe. We're like roommates who happen to share a last name. Marcus leaned forward, his attention completely on her. When's the last time someone really listened to you? The question hit her like a physical blow because she realized she couldn't remember. I should go, she said suddenly, gathering her purse. The intensity of the moment scared her. Sarah, wait. Marcus touched her hand gently, and she felt electricity shoot up her arm. I'm sorry if I overstepped. I just ... I recognize something in you, the same loneliness I've been feeling. She looked into his eyes and saw her own quiet desperation reflected back at her. This isn't a good idea. Probably not, he agreed. But he didn't let go of her hand. But when's the last time you did something just because it felt right? As Sarah drove home, her hand still tingling where he touched it, she knew she was standing at the edge of a cliff. The smart thing would be to step back, to focus on fixing things with David, to be the good wife she'd always tried to be. But, for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah found herself thinking about Marcus all the time. He'd started volunteering at the center, and every Tuesday and Thursday she looked forward to their talks with an intensity that both thrilled and terrified her. They were careful never to be alone together again, but the tension between them grew with every shared glance, every accidentally on purpose brush of hands, every moment of connection that felt deeper than anything she'd experienced in years. Sarah began paying more attention to how she looked on volunteer days. She chose clothes that flattered her figure and spent extra time on her hair and makeup. The woman in the mirror looked more vibrant, more alive than she had in years. At home, David remained oblivious to any change in his wife. He was consumed by a major project at his consulting firm, often working past midnight and falling asleep on the couch in his study. Their conversations, when they had them at all, were about household stuff and social plans. One evening, as Sarah prepared another dinner that would go largely uneaten, she found herself wondering when she'd stopped mattering to her own husband. When had she become just another item on his to-do list, somewhere between picking up dry cleaning and a scheduled dental appointment? I won't be home until late again, David announced, grabbing his keys without looking at her. The Peterson meeting got moved to tomorrow, so I need to prepare. David, Sarah called out before she could stop herself. When's the last time we really talked? He paused in the doorway, finally looking at her with mild confusion. We're talking now. No, I mean really talked about us, about what we want, about whether we're happy. David's expression grew impatient. Sarah, I don't have time for this right now. Everything's fine. We're fine. Can we discuss whatever this is later? And then he was gone, leaving Sarah standing in there empty. Kitchen, holding a dinner she'd made with love for someone who couldn't be bothered to stay and eat it. That night, she did something she'd never done before. She texted Marcus. Are you free to talk? His response came within minutes. Always. For you. They talked on the phone for 3 hours, their conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. Marcus told her about his dreams of opening his own gallery, and Sarah found herself sharing ambitions she'd buried years ago. Back to school to maybe become a counselor and help other women navigate difficult changes. You should do it, Marcus said with conviction. You have so much to offer. David would say it's impractical, that we don't need the money. This isn't about money though, is it? It's about feeling like you matter. When Sarah finally hung up, she felt more understood than she had in her entire marriage, and that realization scared her more than anything. The community center was hosting its annual fundraising gala, and Sarah had volunteered to help with the setup. She'd convinced herself she could handle being around Marcus for an entire evening, that her feelings were under control. She was wrong. Marcus arrived early to help, looking really handsome in a dark suit that emphasized his tall frame. They worked side by side, hanging lights and arranging flowers, their easy companionship making the time fly by. You look beautiful tonight, he said quietly, as they stepped outside for air during a break. Sarah wore a deep blue dress that brought out her eyes, and she'd caught Marcus looking at her all evening with an expression that made her heart race. Marcus, we can't. I know, he said, stepping closer. I know we can't, but I need you to. Know that these past few weeks have meant everything to me. You've brought light back into my life. They were standing in the garden behind the center, fairy lights twinkling above them, and the sound of laughter drifting from inside. It felt like a scene from a movie, romantic and perfect and completely removed from Sarah's real life. I think about you constantly, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I know it's wrong, but I can't help it. Marcus cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. Nothing about the way I feel for you is wrong. Complicated, maybe. Impossible, probably. But not wrong. When he kissed her, it was soft and sweet and full of all the tenderness that had been missing from her life. Sarah felt like she was drowning and being saved at the same time. For a moment, there was nothing else in the world but the two of them and the perfect rightness of being in his arms. When they broke apart, Sarah saw her own wonder and fear reflected in Marcus's eyes. I should go, she said, but she made no move to leave. Sarah, Marcus said her name like a prayer. I'm falling in love with you. The words hung between them, beautiful and terrible. Sarah felt her carefully built world tilting on its axis. I need time to think, she managed to say, then fled back into the gala, leaving Marcus alone under the stars. But as she drove home that night, she knew there was no going back. The kiss had awakened something in her that had been sleeping for far too long, and now she had to decide what she was going to do about it. Sarah spent 3 sleepless nights replaying the kiss, trying to convince herself it had been a mistake. She avoided the community center and ignored Marcus's gentle texts asking if she was okay. But on Saturday morning, as she sat alone in her perfect house listening to David do a business call in his study, she couldn't stand the emptiness anymore. She texted Marcus, "Can we meet?" They met at a small park outside of town, where the chances of running into anyone they knew were minimal. Marcus looked tired, as if he hadn't been sleeping either. I'm sorry about the other night, he said. Right away. I didn't mean to put you in that position. Sarah shook her head. Don't apologize. I wanted you to kiss me. That's what scares me. They sat on a bench overlooking a small lake, careful to keep distance between them, but both very aware of the other's presence. Where do we go from here? Marcus asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. I've never been in this situation before. I always thought I was the type of person who could never cheat, Marcus supplied gently. That word hit her like a slap. I haven't cheated. It was just a kiss. If that matters to you. It doesn't, David sighed. Wait, no, that's not right. Marcus reached over and took her hand. Sarah, I need you to know that whatever happens, I respect your marriage. If you want to walk away right now and pretend this never happened, I'll understand. Looking into his eyes, Sarah realized she'd already made her choice the moment she texted him. I don't want to walk away. What followed was a month of stolen moments and secret meetings, coffee dates that stretched into long walks, afternoon talks in Marcus's apartment above his photography studio, hours of chatting about everything and nothing. Discovering they shared the same sense of humor, the same taste in books, the same dreams they'd stopped believing in. Marcus made Sarah feel seen in a way she'd forgotten was possible. He noticed when she changed her hair. He remembered stories she'd told him. Weeks before, he asked her opinions and listened to her answers as if they mattered. Their relationship remained mostly emotional, with tender kisses and moments of holding each other, as if they could stop time. Sarah told herself that as long as they didn't sleep together, it wasn't really an affair. But she knew she was lying. To herself. At home, David remained oblivious. He was so busy with work that he barely noticed his wife's new energy, her better mood, or the fact that she hummed while doing housework for the first time in years. Sarah felt guilty, but she also felt more alive than she had in her entire marriage. For the first time in years, she was excited to wake up each morning. She had something to look forward to, someone who made her laugh, someone who thought she was extraordinary. She knew it couldn't last forever, but for now, she let herself live in the beautiful, impossible bubble they'd created. The end began with a phone call Sarah wasn't supposed to hear. She'd come home early from meeting Marcus, feeling happy from an afternoon spent talking and laughing in his sunlit studio. David's car was in the driveway, which surprised her. He rarely came home before 8. She found him in his study, speaking in low, urgent tones on the phone. Something in his voice made her pause outside the door. I can't keep doing this. My wife might find out. Yes, I know what I said, that things are complicated at home. Of course I want to see you again. You know how I feel about you. Sarah's world tilted. The irony wasn't lost on her. While she'd been full of guilt over her emotional affair, her husband had apparently been having a physical one. She backed away from the door quietly, her mind spinning. Part of her felt relief if David was cheating. Then maybe what she was doing wasn't so terrible, but mostly she felt a deep sadness at realizing their marriage had been over for longer than either of them had admitted. That evening, they ate dinner in their usual comfortable silence, both carrying secrets that felt like heavy weights in their chests. Sarah found herself studying David's face, looking for signs of guilt or change, but he seemed exactly the same. As always, polite, distant, busy. How was your day? He asked, the same question he'd been asking for 8 years. Fine, Sarah replied, the same answer she always gave. They were strangers pretending to be married, and they both knew it. After David went to bed, Sarah sat in the living room and tried to process what she'd overheard. She felt she should be more upset, should be planning fights or thinking about divorce lawyers instead. She just felt tired and strangely free. The next day, she told Marcus what she'd discovered. How do you feel? He asked, studying her face with the careful attention she'd come to love. Sad, she said honestly. Not because he's cheating, but because we've both reached the point where we need to find love outside our marriage. We've failed each other so completely. Marcus pulled her into his arms, and for the first time, Sarah didn't worry about whether it was right her marriage was already over. They just hadn't made it official yet. What are you going to do? He asked. I don't know. Confront him. I guess, ask for a divorce. And then Sarah looked up at him, seeing her future in his eyes. And then we see what happens when we don't have to hide anymore. But life, Sarah would soon learn, rarely unfolds as simply as we hoped. Sarah chose a Sunday morning for the talk that would end her marriage. David was drinking coffee and reading the newspaper, looking like the picture of suburban happiness, when she sat across from him at their kitchen table. "We need to talk," she said, and something in her tone made him look up from the financial section. "What about?" "About the fact that we're both having affairs." The color drained from David's face, confirming what Sarah had suspected. For a moment, neither spoke. "I don't know what you think you heard," he began, but Sarah held up her hand. "Please don't lie to me. Not now. We owe each other at least that much honesty." David set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. "How long have you known? About me?" "Since Wednesday." "About myself?" "That's more complicated." They looked at each other across the table they'd shared for 8 years. Two people who had once promised to love each other forever, now trying to figure out how they'd become strangers. "Who is she?" Sarah asked, surprised by how calm she sounded. "Jessica, from my office. It started 6 months ago." David's voice was barely above a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I never meant for it to go this far." Sarah nodded. She understood that feeling better than he knew. "Your turn," David said. "Who is he?" "Marcus Reed. I met him at the community center. We haven't slept together, if that matters to you." "It doesn't," David said, and Sarah realized he was right. The physical act wasn't what mattered. The emotional betrayal had happened, long before either of them had touched someone else. They sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. "I'm sorry," David said finally. "I should have been a better husband. Should have paid more attention. Should have tried harder." "I'm sorry too," Sarah replied, and meant it. "We both stopped trying somewhere along the way. We just got comfortable being unhappy." "What happens now?" David asked. "I think we both know," Sarah said softly. "We call lawyers. We figure out how to divide up 8 years of pretending everything was fine." David nodded slowly. "Will you marry him?" "Marcus?" "I don't know. Maybe someday." Sarah paused. "Will you marry Jessica?" "I don't know either. Right now, I just want to figure out how to be happy again." As they worked out the practical details of their separation, who would stay in the house, how to tell their families, when to file the papers, Sarah felt an unexpected lightness. For the first time in years, she and David were being completely honest with each other, and paradoxically, it brought them closer than they'd been in their entire marriage. The end of their relationship was the most real conversation they'd ever had. 3 months later, Sarah was living in a small apartment downtown, signing divorce papers and trying to figure out who she was outside of her marriage. The freedom was exciting but also scary. After 8 years of routine, suddenly having choices felt overwhelming. Marcus had been patient and understanding throughout the separation, never pushing her to rush into anything. But now that Sarah was officially single, their relationship had to grow from stolen moments to something real. Their first official date was at the same cafe where they'd first had coffee, but everything felt different now. There were no secrets between them, no guilt casting shadows over their time together. Sarah could hold Marcus's hand without looking over her shoulder, could kiss him goodnight without feeling like a criminal. "How does it feel?" Marcus asked as they walked to her car after dinner. "Being free." "Scary," Sarah admitted. "Good, but scary. I keep waiting for someone to tell me I'm doing it wrong." Marcus laughed, the sound warm in the cool evening air. "I think you're doing just fine." But as the weeks passed, Sarah discovered That freedom came with a price she hadn't expected. The guilt that had bothered her during the affair had been replaced by something worse. Regret. Not regret about leaving David, that had been the right choice for both of them. David was happier. Now too, openly dating Jessica and seeming more relaxed than Sarah had seen him in years. No, Sarah's regret was about the way she'd handled things, about the lies and the sneaking around, about the fact that she'd emotionally left her marriage months before she'd been honest enough to end it. She'd started seeing a therapist, Dr. Martinez, who helped her work through her complicated feelings about the affair and the divorce. You feel guilty about finding happiness outside your marriage, Dr. Martinez observed during one of their sessions. I feel guilty about being a coward, Sarah corrected. I should have been brave enough to end things with David before I started things with Marcus. I took the easy way out. The easy way out? Dr. Martinez raised an eyebrow. Sarah, what you went through wasn't easy, admitting your marriage wasn't working, finding the courage to leave, rebuilding your life. None of that was easy. But I cheated, Sarah said, the words still hard to say. I became someone I never thought I'd be. You became someone who was desperate to feel alive again. That doesn't excuse the lies, but it explains them. And you're taking responsibility now, which is what matters. Sarah wanted to believe her therapist, but the shame stuck around. She'd always seen herself as someone with strong moral ideas, someone who would handle tough situations with honesty and grace. The affair had shattered that self-image, and she was still trying to piece together who she was now. 6 months into her new life, Sarah was starting to find her rhythm. She'd enrolled in graduate school to pursue the counseling degree she'd always wanted, and she was volunteering at a women's shelter, helping other women get through hard changes. Her relationship with Marcus was steady and loving, but Sarah found herself pulling back emotionally, still dealing with the guilt and shame from how their relationship had begun. One evening, as they were having dinner at Marcus's apartment, he finally brought up the elephant in the room. You're disappearing on me, he said gently. Not physically, but emotionally. You're here, but you're not really here. Sarah set down her fork, knowing he was right. I don't know how to move past it, the guilt. The way we started. Sarah, what would you tell one of the women at the shelter who was beating herself up over choices she made when she was desperate? The question stopped her short. I'd tell her that people make imperfect choices in impossible situations, that what matters is learning from it and doing better going forward. And would you mean it? Of course. Then why can't you extend the same compassion to yourself? That night, lying in Marcus's arms for the first time since her divorce was finalized, Sarah finally understood what Dr. Martinez had been trying to tell her. She wasn't a terrible person who had made terrible choices. She was a human being who had found herself in an impossible situation and had handled it imperfectly. The affair had been wrong, she would never deny that, but it had also been the spark that helped her find the courage to leave a marriage that was slowly killing both her and David. It had led her to Marcus, who loved her with a passion and attention that reminded her what partnership could look like, and it had ultimately led her to this new life where she was pursuing her dreams and helping other women find their own courage. I love you, Marcus whispered against her hair as she drifted off to sleep. I love you too, she whispered back, and for the first time, she said it without any shadows of guilt or regret. 2 years later, Sarah stood in the same community center where she'd first met Marcus, but now she was there as a licensed therapist running support groups for women going through difficult changes. The thing about mistakes, she told the group of women gathered in the circle of chairs, is that they don't define us unless we let them. We all make choices we wish we could do differently. The question is, what are we going to do with the lessons those choices taught us? One of the women in the group, Lisa, raised her hand. But what if the thing you did was really bad? What if you hurt people? Sarah thought about David, who was now happily married to Jessica, and seemed genuinely content. They'd actually become friends of a sort, able to have dinner together occasionally and laugh about the people they'd been when they were married to each other. Then you acknowledge the hurt you caused. You make amends where possible and you commit to doing better, Sarah said. But you don't sentence yourself to a lifetime of misery as punishment. That doesn't serve anyone. After the group ended, Marcus picked Sarah up as he did every Thursday. They'd been married for 6 months now, and while their relationship wasn't perfect, no relationship was. It was honest and passionate, and built on a foundation of truly knowing each other. "How was group?" he asked, kissing her hello. "Good hard, but good." Sarah settled into the passenger seat of his car, the same one he'd driven when he was a stranger, offering to volunteer at the community center. As they drove home through the familiar streets of their town, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them together. The affair that started their relationship would always be complicated. There was no way to make it simple or purely romantic. But it had been the beginning of the most authentic relationship of her life, with a man who saw her clearly and loved her completely. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "The way we started?" Sarah considered the question as she had many times before. "I regret the lies. I regret hurting David, even though it worked out well for him in the end. I regret not being brave enough to end my marriage before I started falling for you. But I don't regret finding you. I don't regret discovering that I was capable of feeling that kind of connection with another person. And I don't regret having the courage to build a life that makes me happy." Marcus reached over and took her hand, intertwining their fingers, in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Besides," Sarah added with a small smile, "if I've learned anything from my work with other women, it's that life rarely follows the neat moral paths we think it should. Sometimes the messiest situations lead to the most beautiful outcomes." As they pulled into the driveway of the house they now shared, smaller than Sarah's old house, but filled with laughter and actual conversation, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. She'd made mistakes, learned from them, and built something beautiful. From the wreckage of her old life, the affair had been her biggest regret and her greatest blessing, often at the same time. But it had led her to this moment, this man, this life where she woke up every morning feeling grateful to be exactly where she was. And in the end, that was worth all the complicated emotions that had brought her here. Sometimes the heart knows what it needs before the mind can understand it. The challenge isn't avoiding complicated situations. It's learning to navigate them with as much honesty and grace as we can muster. Sarah's story reminds us that we're all capable of both great mistakes and great redemption, sometimes within the same chapter of our lives.